It was a quiet Tuesday morning in the city, and the coffee shop on the corner of the street was slowly coming to life. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries drifted through the air, making the small place feel cozy and inviting. People moved in and out, some in a rush to get to work, others taking their time to enjoy the calm before the day began. Among the customers waiting in line was a young black girl named Aliyah. She was around 16 with a bright smile and eyes that carried both curiosity and caution. She clutched her phone in one hand and a small notebook in the other, waiting patiently for her turn. Aliyah loved coming to this coffee shop. It was one of the few places she felt comfortable, a place where she could sit quietly, think, and enjoy her favorite caramel latte. Today, like many mornings, she was there to grab her drink before heading to school. The line moved slowly, but she didn't mind. She liked the little moments of peace, the soft music playing in the background, the faint clinking of cups and saucers, and the gentle hum of conversation. Suddenly, the quiet was interrupted by the roar of motorcycles outside. A group of bikers had parked in front of the shop, and their engines sounded like thunder rolling down the street. People turned their heads as the bikers walked inside, the sound of their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. They were tall, muscular, and covered in tattoos, with leather jackets that had patches of skulls and flames. They carried themselves with confidence, or maybe arrogance, and their presence immediately made the room feel tense. Aliyah tried to ignore them, focusing back on her phone. She had learned over the years that some people like to show off, and sometimes the best way to deal with them was to keep her head down. But one of the bikers, a tall man with sharp features and dark hair, noticed her. His eyes narrowed as he looked at her, and a smirk spread across his face. He leaned slightly toward his friends and muttered something, loud enough for her to hear. At first, it was just a small comment, something mocking about her hairstyle. Aliyah felt her cheeks flush, and she shifted uncomfortably, hoping he wouldn't continue. But the biker wasn't done. He started making louder, crueler remarks, clearly enjoying the reaction he was getting. He gestured toward her in a way that made the whole line of people behind her notice. Aliyah's hands tightened around her phone, and she took a small step back, trying to make herself smaller, invisible if she could. Some people glanced around awkwardly, unsure whether they should intervene. The barista behind the counter looked nervous, pretending to be busy, while sneaking worried glances at the situation. Aliyah's mother, who had come with her, noticed the tension immediately. She moved closer, her hand brushing against Aliyah's shoulder in a silent gesture of support. Aliyah felt a small surge of courage, but it was mixed with fear. She didn't want trouble, she didn't want to make a scene. Yet the humiliation was sharp, cutting through her confidence like a cold wind. The biker laughed, a harsh grating sound, and made another comment, this time about her clothes. "Cute outfit, little girl," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Aliyah's mother opened her mouth to respond, but the biker's friends started laughing, covering their mouths with their hands as if they were proud of his behavior. Aliyah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wished she could disappear, wished the world could swallow her up for a few minutes. Her eyes darted around the room, hoping for some kind of help, some sign that she wasn't completely alone. Unbeknownst to everyone, a man had just entered the shop. He moved quietly, almost casually, but there was something different about him. People passing by might not have noticed him at first, but there was an aura of calm authority around him. He didn't rush to the counter. He didn't join the crowd. He simply walked slowly, his eyes observing everything. That man was John Cena. He had come for a coffee, unaware that he would soon witness something that demanded immediate attention. John noticed the tension in the air as soon as he stepped inside. He could see Aliyah trying to shrink into herself, her fingers gripping her phone tightly. He could see the biker leaning forward, smirking, enjoying the discomfort he was causing. John's experience told him instantly that this situation could escalate quickly if left unchecked. He didn't need to rush or yell. He just needed to be present, and his presence alone could change everything. The biker, unaware of who had just entered, continued his teasing. "You're in the wrong place, little girl," he said, loud enough for several nearby customers to hear. Aliyah felt her face burn with shame. She wanted to speak up, to tell him to stop, but the words stuck in her throat. The room seemed to shrink around her, and for a moment, she felt like the entire coffee shop was watching, judging her for being the target of someone else's cruelty. Her mother stepped forward slightly, trying to create a protective barrier. "Please leave her alone," she said softly but firmly. The biker glanced at her, rolling his eyes as if her words were nothing more than background noise. "Relax," he said with a laugh. "I'm just having some fun." But his version of fun was nothing like hers. His laughter echoed in Alia's ears, mixing with the hum of the coffee machines and the whispers of other customers. It felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in. John Cena, observing quietly from the back, decided it was time to act. He didn't storm forward or confront the biker aggressively. Instead, he walked closer, making sure the biker could see him, making sure everyone in the room could see that someone was paying attention. John's presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The biker noticed the man, tall and muscular, walking calmly yet purposefully toward him. For the first time, the biker hesitated. His smirk faltered, and the laughter of his friends grew quieter. Alia looked up, barely daring to hope, and saw John Cena approaching. Relief and curiosity mixed in her chest. She didn't know who he was at first, but she could tell he wasn't there to ignore what was happening. Something in the way he carried himself suggested that he wouldn't allow the situation to continue. For the first time since the bikers arrived, she felt a little safe. The barista, seeing John Cena's approach, straightened up, taking comfort in the fact that help had arrived. Other customers leaned back slightly, watching as the tension in the room shifted. The biker, once so sure of himself, now looked uncertain. The confidence in his voice began to waver, and he muttered something to his friends. They glanced at each other nervously, realizing that the dynamic had changed. Alia's mother gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're not alone." Alia nodded, feeling a little braver. Even though she hadn't spoken, even though she had felt powerless moments ago, the support of someone like John Cena and the quiet solidarity of her mother gave her strength she didn't know she had. The biker, still smirking but now wary, decided to retreat slightly. He didn't understand why he suddenly felt uncomfortable. The energy in the room had shifted from humiliation and fear to observation and quiet authority. Alia noticed it too. She realized that sometimes, simply being seen, having someone stand with you, even silently, could make a huge difference. As John Cena moved closer to the counter, Alia took a deep breath. She straightened her back, lifted her chin slightly, and allowed herself to feel a small spark of courage. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely, but it was no longer paralyzing. The biker, now realizing that his audience had changed and that he was no longer in control, muttered something under his breath and stepped back toward his friends. His laughter had faded, replaced by unease. For a moment, the coffee shop was quiet again. The smell of coffee, the soft music, and the gentle chatter returned, but there was a sense of relief lingering in the air. Alia felt lighter, stronger, as if someone had lifted a weight off her shoulders. She understood that courage didn't always come from confronting someone alone. It could come from knowing someone had your back. John Cena quietly ordered his coffee, giving a small nod to Alia and her mother. His presence had already made an impact, and now he simply allowed the room to settle back into normalcy. Alia smiled faintly, feeling gratitude that words couldn't fully express. She knew that the day had started differently than she expected, but it had also taught her something important. Even when things feel impossible, help can come from the most unexpected places. As she stepped forward to finally get her latte, Alia felt a little taller, a little braver. The morning had begun with fear and embarrassment, but it was already turning into a story of hope, courage, and unexpected allies. She knew the biker might never understand the lesson he had received, but she did. She realized that dignity and kindness always mattered more than anyone's cruelty, and for the first time that morning, she felt like she could face the day without shrinking from the world. The coffee shop had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the tension from moments ago still lingered like a shadow. Alia felt the warmth of her mother's hand on her shoulder, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. She clutched her latte tighter, taking small sips to calm the fluttering in her chest. The biker and his friends had moved to a corner of the shop, their voices lower now, their earlier confidence subdued. But Alia could still feel the weight of their presence, a reminder that humiliation could appear at any moment. Even though John Cena had intervened earlier, Alia couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She realized that the embarrassment she had felt wasn't just about the biker. It was about being singled out, about feeling small in a place she considered safe. She looked around the shop, noticing familiar faces, strangers, and a few who had been quietly observing everything. Some offered small smiles as if acknowledging her courage for staying composed even in discomfort. Her mother leaned closer, whispering softly, "Don't let them make you feel less than who you are. You're strong and you handled that really well." Aaliyah nodded, trying to believe the words. She had felt powerless moments ago, but now she was beginning to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to face it. The biker, still unaware of the lesson he had just received, began talking to one of his friends. Their voices were low, but Aaliyah could hear bits of their conversation. They were complaining about how weird the situation had been, how they hadn't expected anyone to stand up to them. The realization that someone like John Cena could notice them, and that people were quietly judging their behavior, seemed to frustrate them more than anything else. Aaliyah's attention shifted to her notebook, where she had been jotting down ideas for a school project. Her hands were steady now, her focus returning. Writing had always been her escape, a way to process emotions that felt too complicated to say aloud. She wrote a line about courage, about how standing up didn't always mean confronting someone directly. Sometimes it meant accepting help, observing carefully, and knowing that not all battles were fought alone. While Aaliyah was immersed in her thoughts, John Cena remained nearby, quietly observing the bikers from a distance. He wasn't there to intimidate unnecessarily, but he knew the importance of ensuring they didn't make anyone else feel unsafe. His presence acted as a shield, a reminder that kindness and respect mattered more than power and bravado. People in the shop, once hesitant to intervene, now seemed to feel a subtle courage themselves. They weren't rushing to confront the bikers, but there was a shared understanding that inappropriate behavior would not go unnoticed. The biker, noticing the quiet glances and subtle body language of the other patrons, began to feel a strange discomfort. He had thought the coffee shop was his stage, a place where he could show dominance without consequences. But suddenly the room felt smaller and he felt exposed. His friends tried to distract him with jokes and laughter, but the air was different now. The energy had shifted from mockery to quiet accountability, and even the most confident people could feel the change. Aaliyah took another deep breath, steadying herself. She had learned a valuable lesson in those few minutes of embarrassment. She realized that fear often came from imagining what might happen, not what was actually happening. She had survived the moment, and more importantly, she had been supported. This realization brought a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt before. Her mother, noticing the change in her daughter, smiled softly. "See, you handled it. You didn't let him control your feelings." Aaliyah smiled back, feeling a little lighter. She understood that while the biker's actions were meant to shame her, they couldn't define her identity or worth. She was more than someone else's opinion, and more importantly, she wasn't alone in standing up for herself, even indirectly. The bikers eventually got their drinks and began to move toward the door. Their earlier confidence was now replaced with unease. They whispered to each other, probably trying to make sense of what had happened. Aaliyah watched them leave, feeling a mix of relief and quiet satisfaction. It was strange to think that a few words, a calm presence, and shared human understanding could change the energy in a room so quickly. John Cena remained nearby, paying no attention to the bikers as they left. He approached Aaliyah and her mother, giving a gentle nod. "You did well," he said quietly. Aaliyah looked up, surprised that he had addressed her directly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt seen, recognized, and supported, all things that mattered far more than the humiliation she had just experienced. Her mother added, "Sometimes people act cruel because they feel powerful in the moment. But courage is realizing that their words don't control you." Aaliyah nodded, realizing that she had experienced this lesson firsthand. It wasn't just about standing up physically. It was about standing tall emotionally, knowing that her dignity wasn't for anyone else to take. The coffee shop had returned to its gentle hum. The soft music played, cups clinked, and people quietly chatted. Aaliyah sipped her latte, savoring the warmth and the sense of safety that now filled the room. She looked around, noticing the small acts of kindness, a customer giving a smile, a barista offering a polite nod, and felt a sense of community she hadn't recognized before. Even small gestures mattered, especially in moments where someone felt vulnerable. As Aliyah prepared to leave, she realized she had grown a little in those moments. She had learned that bravery didn't always have to be loud or confrontational. Sometimes it came from resilience, from being patient, from knowing that support could appear unexpectedly. She felt a sense of pride, not in defeating someone, but in surviving with grace and dignity. Her mother held the door open, and Aliyah stepped outside, feeling the cool morning air on her face. The city moved around her, people walking, cars passing, life continuing, but she carried a quiet strength with her. She knew that challenges would come again, that there would be moments of fear and embarrassment in the future, but she also knew she had a toolkit now: courage, patience, support, and the understanding that her worth could never be diminished by someone else's cruelty. John Cena remained in the coffee shop, finishing his coffee quietly. He watched Aliyah leave, feeling satisfied that the situation had been resolved without conflict, without unnecessary aggression. Sometimes intervention wasn't about creating a scene. It was about quietly standing with those who needed support and letting humanity guide the moment. Aliyah walked down the street toward school, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her latte in hand. She thought about what had happened, about the lessons she had learned, and about how courage could take many forms. She smiled to herself, realizing that she had experienced something meaningful, even if it had started as painful and frightening. For the biker and his friends, the incident had been a lesson in humility. They had expected to intimidate, to dominate, to control the room, but instead they faced quiet accountability. They had learned that actions have consequences, that people notice behavior, and that strength isn't measured by intimidation. Aliyah didn't dwell on the bikers anymore. Her mind was focused on herself, on the future, on how she could carry the lessons forward. She knew that she could face challenges with composure, with grace, and with confidence. She realized that bravery wasn't about overpowering others. It was about standing tall in the face of discomfort, knowing who you were and what you stood for. By the time she reached her school, Aliyah felt ready for the day. The morning had been unexpected, filled with tension and fear, but it had also been transformative. She had experienced humiliation, yes, but she had also experienced support, courage, and resilience. And most importantly, she had learned that even ordinary places like a coffee shop could become arenas of empowerment when kindness, awareness, and courage intersected. As she walked through the school gates, she carried a quiet smile. She knew that the world could be harsh and unpredictable, but she also knew that she had the strength to face it. Moments of fear didn't define her, they refined her, shaping her into someone who could handle life's challenges with a steady heart and a calm mind. The coffee shop had returned to a quiet hum after the bikers had left the main area, but the sense of tension hadn't completely disappeared. Aliyah sat back in her chair, finishing the last sips of her latte. Her hands no longer trembled, but her mind was still buzzing with the events that had unfolded. She replayed the bikers' mocking words in her head and realized how unfair it had been. The humiliation had felt sharp, but the support she had received, first from her mother and then from John Cena, had softened the sting. John Cena, meanwhile, stayed in the shop longer than he had initially planned. He didn't want to intrude, but he also knew that in situations like these, people often needed reassurance. He quietly observed the other patrons, making sure that Aliyah wasn't feeling isolated or scared, now that the bikers had moved slightly away. His calm presence radiated confidence, and it was clear to anyone who noticed him that he wasn't someone who tolerated harassment lightly. The biker and his friends had settled in a corner near the window, but their earlier bravado had vanished. They kept their voices low, trying to talk among themselves without drawing attention. Yet every now and then, they cast uneasy glances toward Aliyah and John. The realization that someone powerful and aware had witnessed their actions seemed to weigh on them. Even their laughter, once loud and grating, had turned hesitant and uncertain. Aliyah's mother, sensing the lingering unease, encouraged her daughter to stay calm. "Don't worry about them now," she said softly. "Focus on yourself. You've handled this far better than you think." Aliyah nodded, trying to let her mother's words sink in. She understood the wisdom in them. She couldn't control what the biker had said or done, but she could control her own response. That alone gave her a sense of power. As she reflected on the morning's events, she realized something important. Courage wasn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it was about maintaining composure, even when someone tried to make you feel small. It was about knowing that their words didn't define you, that their opinion wasn't a reflection of your worth. This realization gave Aaliyah a quiet strength, and she began to feel more like herself again. Meanwhile, John Cena kept a watchful eye on the bikers. He didn't move aggressively, and he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he let his presence speak for him. The subtle shift in energy was noticeable. The bikers, who had thought themselves in control, now felt exposed. They glanced at each other nervously, uncertain about what to do next. Their confidence was fading, replaced by an awkward awareness that their behavior was inappropriate and that they had been noticed in the wrong way. Aaliyah, observing the scene quietly, felt a mix of relief and curiosity. She realized that sometimes the world responded to cruelty in unexpected ways. The biker had intended to embarrass her, but his own discomfort had begun. She couldn't help but feel a small sense of justice. Not that she wished harm on him, but that he had learned a lesson in humility without anyone having to escalate the situation. At that moment, one of the bikers stood up, perhaps hoping to regain some sense of control. He adjusted his jacket, pretending to be casual, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. John Cena's gaze followed him steadily, and the biker immediately felt the weight of it. The silent message was clear. He was being watched, and his actions mattered. No one else needed to intervene because John's presence alone had shifted the balance of power. Aaliyah's mother leaned closer and whispered, "See? You're not alone. Someone noticed what was happening, and that's important." Aaliyah nodded, understanding the importance of being seen and validated. In situations of humiliation or fear, simply knowing that someone else recognizes your struggle can make a world of difference. She felt a flicker of pride that she had stayed composed despite the initial fear. The biker, realizing that he could no longer intimidate Aaliyah without consequences, muttered something under his breath and sat back down. His friends, sensing the shift in mood, also quieted. Their laughter had disappeared entirely, replaced by a nervous energy that made the entire group seem smaller and less threatening. The coffee shop, once tense and filled with discomfort, now seemed to breathe again, almost as if a heavy cloud had lifted. Aaliyah, feeling the relief wash over her, decided to focus on something she could control. She pulled out her notebook and began to write. Writing had always been her way of processing feelings, and today was no different. She jotted down thoughts about courage, about fear, and about how people sometimes act cruelly without understanding the consequences. She reflected on how the biker's actions had affected her, but also on how the presence of support had turned the situation around. John Cena, noticing her taking a moment for herself, smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile for attention. It was a quiet acknowledgement of resilience. Aaliyah felt a small warmth inside, realizing that someone had not only noticed her struggle but also respected her strength in handling it. It was a moment of human connection, subtle but powerful, that would stay with her long after she left the coffee shop. The bikers eventually got their drinks and began moving toward the door. The tall biker who had singled out Aaliyah hesitated, as if unsure how to leave without further embarrassment. John Cena followed at a distance, not to intimidate, but to ensure that they wouldn't cause more trouble. The rest of the shop watched quietly, sensing that the morning's drama was nearing its end. The bikers muttered among themselves, probably recounting how strange it felt to be seen and challenged without anyone raising their voice. As the bikers stepped outside, the tension in the room eased further. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She realized that the morning had been an unexpected lesson in human behavior. People could act cruelly, yes, but they could also be held accountable, even without anger or confrontation. The experience had taught her that courage and composure could create change without aggression. Her mother reached for her hand, holding it gently as they prepared to leave the coffee shop. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You stayed strong when it mattered." Aaliyah smiled, feeling the words resonate deeply. She had feared humiliation moments ago, but now she understood that bravery could take many forms. Sometimes it was loud and defiant, and sometimes it was quiet and steadfast. Aaliyah glanced around the shop one last time before leaving. The barista smiled at her, a small gesture of encouragement. Other customers gave polite nods or quiet smiles, acknowledging her presence and the way she had handled the situation. It was a reminder that even in public spaces, Small acts of kindness and recognition mattered immensely. Walking outside, Aaliyah felt the cool morning air on her face. She held her latte carefully and kept her notebook tucked under her arm. The city moved around her, people rushing, cars passing, life continuing, but she felt a little taller, a little stronger. The humiliation she had faced wasn't erased entirely, but it was softened by the support, the courage she had found within herself, and the presence of someone who could intervene calmly when needed. John Cena lingered near the doorway, watching the bikers disappear down the street. He didn't need to make a scene. His silent authority had been enough. The situation had been resolved with dignity, respect, and minimal confrontation. It was a reminder that sometimes the strongest interventions were the quietest ones, and that human connection and awareness often carried more weight than aggression or anger. As Aaliyah and her mother continued walking, she reflected on the lessons of the morning. She had learned that fear often comes from anticipating what might happen, not from what is actually happening. She had learned that courage could appear in unexpected forms, and that support didn't always have to be dramatic to be effective. Most importantly, she had learned that dignity and self-respect could not be taken away by someone else's cruelty. By the time they reached the street corner, Aaliyah felt ready for the rest of the day. School awaited, and the challenges of adolescence were always unpredictable, but she knew she had grown in subtle ways. She had faced embarrassment, uncertainty, and fear, and she had emerged stronger, more aware, and more resilient. She understood that life would continue to present moments of discomfort, but she also knew that she had the tools to navigate them with grace. The bikers, meanwhile, had learned a quiet lesson about humility. Their attempt to intimidate and embarrass someone had been deflected not by confrontation or anger, but by calm presence and quiet authority. They had experienced firsthand that actions have consequences, that others notice behavior, and that power isn't measured by intimidation alone. Aaliyah didn't dwell on them. Her focus was on herself, on the future, and on the confidence she had discovered in moments of vulnerability. She felt empowered to face challenges, to speak up when needed, and to trust that help and support could come from unexpected places. As they walked away from the coffee shop, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the city streets. Aaliyah felt a sense of clarity and strength. The experience, though uncomfortable at first, had become a lesson she would carry with her, a reminder that courage, dignity, and human connection could overcome fear and humiliation, even in the most ordinary of places. The coffee shop had quieted down, but the morning's events were far from over. Aaliyah sat at the small table by the window, finishing the last sips of her latte. Her notebook lay open in front of her, but for the moment she wasn't writing. Her mind was buzzing, replaying the encounter with the biker. Even though he had left the main area, she could still feel the tension lingering in the air, a reminder that not everyone in the world acted kindly or fairly. Her mother reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Aaliyah's arm. "You did really well," she said softly. "You didn't let him see you afraid, and that's important." Aaliyah nodded, feeling the warmth of her mother's support. It was one thing to survive an embarrassing situation, but another to process it afterward and recognize her own strength. She realized that courage wasn't always about fighting back. It could also be about staying composed, protecting yourself, and letting the right people step in when needed. At that moment, John Cena moved closer. He had been quietly observing, ensuring that the bikers didn't return or create more trouble. His calm demeanor carried a sense of authority that seemed to settle the space around him. Aaliyah looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no judgment in his gaze, only quiet recognition and reassurance. He wasn't there to make her feel indebted, only to ensure that the situation was handled safely. The biker, meanwhile, had moved to the corner of the shop near the window, trying to act casual. He muttered to his friends, clearly frustrated. "I didn't expect anyone to notice," he said, glancing in John Cena's direction. The others shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their earlier confidence had been misplaced. For the first time, the biker felt the weight of accountability, even without anyone directly confronting him. John Cena decided it was time to ensure the lesson was clear. He didn't raise his voice or act aggressively. He simply stepped toward the bikers, his posture calm but firm. The tall biker looked up, suddenly realizing that he couldn't escape the consequences of his behavior simply by staying silent. John's presence alone carried authority. He didn't need to yell or threaten to make the point clear. "Intimidating people isn't a joke," John said, his voice steady. "It's not about power. It's about respect, and right now you're failing at that." The biker froze, his friends shifting awkwardly behind him. The room, which had been tense moments ago, now felt charged with quiet expectation. Everyone could sense that something important was happening. Not a fight, not a scene, but a lesson being delivered with dignity. Aaliyah's mother whispered to her, "Watch. This is how courage can work, without shouting, without hurting anyone. Sometimes being calm and firm is enough." Aaliyah nodded, her eyes wide as she observed John Cena's method. She realized that true strength didn't always come from force, it came from confidence, composure, and the ability to stand up for what's right without escalating the situation unnecessarily. The biker shifted nervously. His friends muttered among themselves, trying to support him, but the confidence they had shown earlier was gone. John Cena's calm authority had disrupted their dynamic entirely. For the first time, the biker felt what it meant to be on the other side of public scrutiny, not humiliated violently, but quietly and effectively held accountable for his actions. Aaliyah felt a mix of relief and quiet satisfaction. She didn't feel triumphant in a flashy way, but she recognized that the situation had been resolved with dignity. The biker had learned a lesson, she had been supported, and the coffee shop was once again a safe space. This moment felt transformative, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. The barista, who had been quietly observing from behind the counter, let out a small, relieved sigh. Other customers exchanged subtle smiles, acknowledging that something meaningful had occurred. The energy in the room had shifted from tension and discomfort to calm understanding. Aaliyah realized that courage and accountability often worked best when delivered with thoughtfulness and presence, rather than anger or confrontation. John Cena continued speaking to the biker in a calm, firm tone. "You don't know what people are dealing with," he said. "You have no idea what it's like to face humiliation, fear, or embarrassment every day. But you can choose to be better. You can choose to respect others." The biker's face betrayed a mix of frustration and shame. He muttered under his breath, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. His friends leaned in slightly, clearly realizing that their behavior had consequences beyond what they had imagined. Aaliyah watched silently, absorbing every moment. She understood that the biker's discomfort was not something she had to provoke. It was the natural result of someone being called out respectfully and firmly for doing wrong. She felt a sense of empowerment knowing that fairness and respect could prevail without violence or hostility. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "Remember this," she whispered. "True courage is not about making someone else feel small. It's about standing tall and letting respect guide your actions." Aaliyah nodded, taking the words deeply to heart. The morning had started with fear and humiliation, but it was now becoming a lesson in dignity, courage, and accountability. The biker finally slumped back into his chair, muttering incoherently to his friends. They had clearly learned that their actions had consequences, and the quiet authority of someone who understood respect had shifted the power dynamic completely. No one had been harmed. No one had been humiliated violently, but the lesson had landed fully. Aaliyah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She realized that even ordinary places, like a small coffee shop, could become arenas for important lessons in human behavior. It wasn't about being dramatic, it was about presence, awareness, and the courage to intervene when needed. John Cena had done exactly that quietly and effectively, and the impact was profound. She took another sip of her latte, savoring the warmth, and allowed herself to relax fully for the first time since the bikers had arrived. Her mother smiled at her, proud not just of how Aaliyah had handled herself, but of the way the situation had been resolved without confrontation or escalation. Sometimes the most meaningful victories were quiet ones. The barista approached, refilling her water glass with a small smile. Other customers continued their conversations, quieter now, but with an unspoken acknowledgement of what had just happened. The room felt lighter, more human, as though the morning's tension had lifted entirely. John Cena, sensing the moment was coming to a natural end, stepped back slightly. His calm authority had done its work. He gave Aaliyah a small nod, an acknowledgement of her composure and bravery. She felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that she had been seen and supported in a moment that could have been overwhelming. The biker and his friends finally left the shop entirely. Their departure was quiet, subdued, and unceremonious. They had intended to intimidate, to assert dominance, but instead, they had been shown that respect and dignity mattered more than any display of bravado. The lesson they carried would likely stay with them longer than any immediate confrontation could have achieved. Aaliyah's mother helped her gather her things. "You handled this beautifully," she said softly. "You stayed strong and graceful. That's more important than anything else." Aaliyah smiled faintly, realizing that the morning had transformed her understanding of courage and human behavior. She had faced embarrassment, fear, and intimidation, and she had come out stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Walking toward the door, Aaliyah felt a renewed sense of self-confidence. The city outside moved as usual, cars honking, people walking briskly, but she felt a quiet sense of calm within herself. The lesson of the morning was clear. Courage was not always about confrontation. It could also be about maintaining composure, trusting in support, and allowing accountability to occur naturally and respectfully. As they stepped outside, the sun had begun to break through the morning clouds. The warmth of the sunlight felt like a symbol of clarity after the tense start to the day. Aaliyah felt taller, stronger, and more capable than she had just an hour before. She understood that fear would come again in life, that people might attempt to belittle or embarrass her, but she now had the knowledge and experience to handle it with grace and confidence. John Cena remained in the coffee shop, finishing his own coffee quietly. He didn't need recognition or thanks. His goal had been simple: to ensure that someone in need felt supported and that inappropriate behavior was addressed without escalating violence. His approach had been calm, authoritative, and effective, demonstrating that courage and intervention could be gentle yet powerful. Aaliyah's morning had begun with fear and humiliation, but it ended with a lesson she would carry for life. She had experienced the power of support, the importance of dignity, and the quiet authority of someone willing to intervene correctly. The experience had transformed a simple coffee run into an unforgettable moment of learning and growth. As she walked down the street toward school, Aaliyah reflected on everything she had seen and experienced. She understood that strength came in many forms: standing tall despite fear, seeking support when needed, and trusting that accountability could occur without aggression. The morning had been a small but powerful lesson in human behavior, and she knew it would shape her approach to challenges in the future. The morning sun had fully risen, casting a warm glow over the city streets. Aaliyah walked toward school with her mother by her side, her latte safely in hand and her notebook tucked under her arm. The events at the coffee shop were still fresh in her mind, but she felt different now, lighter, stronger, more certain of herself. The humiliation she had faced earlier hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into a lesson she would carry with her. She thought about the biker and his friends, about how they had tried to intimidate her, and about how powerless she had initially felt. Yet she also thought about how she had handled herself, quietly, patiently, and with dignity. And she thought about John Cena, who had stepped in at the right moment, not with anger or aggression, but with calm authority and respect. That had made all the difference. Walking down the street, Aaliyah realized that bravery came in many forms. Sometimes it was loud, bold, and confrontational. Sometimes it was quiet, composed, and patient. Today she had experienced the latter, and it had been powerful. She smiled slightly to herself, understanding that courage wasn't about overpowering someone else. It was about standing tall, maintaining dignity, and letting respect guide the outcome. Her mother noticed her thoughtful expression and squeezed her hand gently. "You've learned something important today," she said softly. Courage, dignity, and respect aren't always obvious. Sometimes they're quiet, but they're always strong. Aaliyah nodded, feeling the truth of her mother's words settle in her chest. She had experienced a moment that could have left her feeling small, but instead it had left her feeling capable and self-assured.